The new coding problem is not that tools can write code. It's that they can write too much, too fast, and someone still has to make sure that it's right. In 2025, Stack Overflow reported that 84% of developers were already using or planning to use AI tools in their development process, while 51% of professional developers said that they use them daily, but it also tells us something really important. The real skill is no longer just asking one big question and accepting the first answer. The topic, how to use multiple agents in Claude Code, simply means using Claude in a more organized way. And when one helper can help, the other can build, and another can review, another can test, and another can explain the work clearly. Now, Claude Code's official documentation describes subagents as a separate helper instance that can handle focused subtasks, run different checks, and keep the main conversation cleaner. And Claude Code's agent teams documentation explains that multiple Claude Code sessions can work like teammates with one lead session coordinating the work. Now, this topic matters because coding is moving from generate something quickly to build something carefully, and that shift is happening at the same time that the World Economic Forum says AI and information processing technologies are expecting to transform 86% of employees' businesses by 2030. So in this video, the idea is not to make Claude look magical or complicated. The idea here is to show practical workflows where Claude behaves more like a small project team than a single chat box. So one role builds the first version, one checks whether it makes sense, one finds mistakes in it, and one writes the explanation, and the final output becomes cleaner, safer, and easier to understand. Let me walk you through the agenda for this video so you know exactly what we're going to be covering step by step. Problem with single prompts. Why one instruction fails over the tasks when they become complicated and layered. Multi-agent thinking. How we're breaking one task into roles like builder, reviewer, tester, and planner. Planning phase in Claude. How we first structure the workflow before generating any output. UI builder role demo. Creating a simple task manager interface using focused instructions. Logic implementation demo. You will understand handling add, delete, and update functionality step by step. Code review role demo. Identify issues and improve structure without rewriting everything. Testing role demo. You can create real-world test cases and edge scenarios to validate behavior. Control improvement cycle. Applying only necessary fixes based on review and test feedback. Feature upgrade demo. Adding mark as completed using the same role-based approach. Final review. Validating the complete workflow and summarizing the output. So before we move on, let's begin with a quiz question. What is the main advantage of using multiple agents in Claude? Is it A, faster internet speed, B, structured output, C, storage space, or is it D, automatic coding skills? Let us know your answers in the comments below. So what if the problem is not Claude's answer, but the way we ask it the question? Today, many developers use these tools, but they also face one common issue. The answer looks almost right, but still needs fixing. In Stack Overflow's 2025 developer survey, 84% of respondents said that they use or plan to use AI tools, but 66% said that their biggest frustration is getting answers that are almost right, but not quite. So instead of giving Claude one huge task, we divide the work into smaller rules. So now that we understand why one long prompt can become messy, let's move on to the idea of using Claude like a small working team. So imagine Claude is not just one working assistant, but a small team sitting inside one workspace. So one person can build the interface, one person can check mistakes, one person writes explanation, and one person tests what can go wrong. So Claude Code officially describes subagents as specialized assistants that can handle specific types of tasks in their own context and return a focused result. So in our demo, we will be using 4 simple roles, which is UI builder, code reviewer, documentation writer, and tester. So now that we know who is in the team, let's try to understand how this team will work together. So a sub-agent is like calling one specialist for one job. For example, review this code or write documentation. Now the specialist works separately and returns the result. An agent team, on the other hand, is different. Here, multiple teammates can work independently and one lead coordinates the final output. So Claude Code Doc says that agent teams are useful when different teammates need to explore separate parts like front-end, back-end, tests, or review. So the simple idea is this. Use one focused helper for small tasks and use a team-style workflow when the task has too many moving parts. Now that the difference is clear, let's move on to the demo plan. So we're not building something complicated. We're building something as simple as a task manager because everyone can understand it quickly. Now this app will let the user add a task, see the task list, delete a task, and later mark this task as completed. So this is important because the goal is not to show how difficult the code is. The goal here is to show how different roles improve the same output step by step. So now that the app idea is clear, let's move on to the actual workflow. We will follow a clean path. First plan, then build, then review, then document, and then test, finally improve. And this is exactly why multiple roles become useful. So the UI builder creates the first version. The code reviewer checks the logic if it's clear. The documentation writer explains the workflow. The tester checks edge cases like empty task input or delete behavior. Stack Overflow's 2025 survey also found that only 17% of agent users agreed that agents could improve team collaboration, which shows why structured workflows matter more than random prompting. So now that the workflow is clear, let's move on into the first live prompt inside Claude. So here is where the demo becomes more real. After the basic task manager works, we will add a new feature, which is marking tasks as completed. So instead of directly asking Claude to add the feature, we will ask it to split the work list, which is UI update, logic update, and then test update. So Claude Code also mentions that the agent teams work best when teammates can work independently, but they add more coordination and usage. So now that we know how to add a feature safely, let's move on to the final check. So the biggest lesson is simple. Don't use Claude like a magic button. Use it like a structured team. One big prompt may give a fast answer, but a role-based workflow gives more control. The planner thinks first, the builder creates, the reviewer checks, and the tester validates. Now the documentation writer explains. Claude Pro or Max can also be used with Claude Code, and Anthropic says that Pro and Max plans include Claude Code access with the same subscription. So now that we're clear about the concept, the next part should be the live Claude demo. So you're now on the Claude Pro interface and we are directly starting with the workflow demonstration. So now that I'm inside Claude, I will begin by organizing the tasks so that we can clearly understand what we are trying to build. So instead of asking Claude one big question, we will break the work into different roles, just like how a real team works on a project. Now, let me start with giving Claude the main instruction. So we're going to simulate a real software workflow using multiple agents. So let's start by typing this prompt as shown in the screen. Task, build and improve a task manager app logic in steps. So we will break work into different roles, where we will be breaking the work into different roles, which is followed by UI builder, code reviewer, documentation writer, and followed by tester. So this was the prompt as shown. First, we will be explaining how we would divide this task between these roles before making any changes. So for this, I have prepared the prompt using GPT so it's easy to reuse during the demo. So this prompt has three main parts. So the first part tells Claude that we are simulating a real work. The second part defines the task. The third part clearly divides the work into different roles before any changes are made. So this step is important because before using multiple agents, we are asking Claude to plan the division of the work. So the idea is to avoid confusion and ensure that each role has a clear responsibility. UI Builder will focus on how the app looks, the code reviewer will check the logic, the documentation writer will explain the workflow, and the tester will think about what can go wrong. So now that we have the planning input, let's move on to the next step, where we will start the actual workflow execution by assigning the first role. So we will begin with the UI Builder role. So you will be using the following prompt. Act as an UI builder. Create a simple structure which belongs to the task manager using the following attributes as mentioned below. So I will be mentioning the attributes here in points, which are input box for task entry, add button, task list, delete option for each task, followed by keep the design extreme, do not over engineer, turn only the final implement. In this prompt, the role is UI builder and the task is to create the task manager structure, and the required elements are the input box, add button, task list, and delete option. So the last line tells Claude not to overcomplicate the design. So this step shows how we are assigning one focused responsibility to Claude. So instead of asking for everything at once, we are making Claude focus only on the interface. So this makes the output cleaner, easier to explain, and easier to improve later. So now that the UI structure is ready, we move on to the next role. Now we will bring in the logic reviewer role. So now let's go ahead and add the following prompt. Now act as the code reviewer for the same task manager logic. Go ahead and check the implementation of following: unnecessary complexity, unclear structure, possible bugs in add task or delete flow. Do not rewrite everything, only point out the issues in symptoms and suggest minimal fixes. So this review prompt was generated with ChatGPT for easy reference while presenting. So this has a very specific purpose. Claude should not be building anything new here. It should only review the existing logic, check for complexity, identify unclear structure, and point out possible issues in the add and delete flow. So here we are using Claude as a review system instead of a builder. So this is important because in real workflows, we should not be accepting the first version blindly. A separate review step helps us catch mistakes before they become bigger problems. So now that we have the review feedback, we are going to apply controlled improvements. So for the earlier prompt, this was the output. Now let's go ahead and type the next prompt. Apply only the essential fixes in your review. Keep the implementation simple and beginner friendly. Please do not add any new changes or new features or libraries. So this was an improvement prompt ready so that we could control what Claude changes. So this prompt has one main goal: apply only the necessary fixes, and it also clearly says that the implementation should remain simple and that Claude should not be adding any extra features or new libraries. So this step is important because we are not blindly accepting every suggestion. We are controlling what gets multiplied, and this exactly shows how a multi-role workflow stays simple. So one role reviews, but the final changes are still controlled. So now that the core UI and logic are stable, we will move on to the documentation role. So now we will type the following prompt. Now act as a documentation writer. Create a simple explanation of the task manager, what it does, what tasks are added, how the tasks are added and deleted, and how the structure is organized. Followed by this, keep it beginner friendly and short. So this documentation prompt was drafted from ChatGPT, so the explanation remains simple for the learners. So the components of this prompt are straightforward. Claude is given the documentation writer role, and this is asked to explain what the app does, how adding works, how deleting works, and how the structure is organized. So this step shows you how the documentation is treated as a separate responsibility and not mixed with coding. So this is how real teams work. One person may build the feature, another may review it, and another may explain it clearly for the others. So now that the documentation is ready, let's move on to the testing role. So now type the following prompt. Now act as a tester. Check the task manager logic and identify edge cases, empty input behavior, incorrect task handling scenarios. Don't change the code, only describe the scenario as well as the behavior. Please replace the word expected with test scenario. So this prompt tells Claude to act as a tester, check the edge cases, look at empty input behavior, and identify incorrect task handling scenarios. It also clearly says not to change the code, and this step is important because testing is not about writing code first. This is about thinking what can go wrong. For example, what happens if the user clicks add without typing anything? What happens if the user deletes a task? What happens if multiple tasks are added? So these are the types of questions a tester should ask. So now we move into controlled improvement mode based on the tester's output. So go ahead and type, based on the output given by you, apply only the necessary fixes. Ensure that empty tasks are not added. Delete works correctly, remains simple, and do not include any new features. So this fixed prompt was prepared using GPT to keep the improvement limited and safe. So the main components are: use the test scenario, apply only necessary fixes, prevent empty tasks, confirm delete behavior, and keep the UI simple. Now the final line avoids extra feature additions. So this is the final control execution step for the basic version. Here we are ensuring stability before finishing the workflow. So we're not adding anything fancy here. We are only making sure that the basic app works properly. So now that all the roles have been completed, we will simulate the final improvement cycle where we can combine everything into a clean final version. So for that, you go ahead and type, now consolidate everything as a final clean task manager application implementation. Make sure that the UI is simple, the logic is clean, and the behavior is as per terms. You can also add the documentation is correct or accurate. Finally, we type return the final clean version only. So now this prompt combines the output from all the previous roles. It checks the UI, logic, behavior, and documentation, then asks Claude to return the final clean version. Now this step represents the final system level consolidation where all the agent outputs are merged into one stable final solution. In simple terms, this is like a lead person in a team checking whether the design, code, testing, and explanation are all aligned. Now let's go ahead and simulate a real-world scenario where a new feature request comes in. So we will switch to a multi-role enhancement workflow. So go ahead and type, add a new feature. Mark the tasks as complete. Split the work internally into UI update. Within brackets, you have to mention a check box or toggle, logic update or static change within brackets. Finally, test behavior, which is behavior validation. We end this with first create a plan only. Do not implement this yet. So now this feature planning prompt was created with ChatGPT so that Claude does not jump directly into coding. So the first prompt gives you the new features, which is marking tasks as completed. Then it divides the feature into UI update, logic update, and test update. Finally, it asks Claude to create only the plan. So this is one of the most important parts of the demo. Here we are forcing Claude to behave like a multi-agent system internally. Instead of just saying, add the feature, we are asking it to plan how different roles will handle the feature before implementation begins. Now let's go ahead and approve the plan. Proceed the implementation of the plan. Keep everything exactly as planned. You need to keep it minimal, readable. Make sure you separate these with commas, comma, comma, consistent with the existing structure. Here, the implementation stays aligned with the previous plan, and this prompt has two important parts. First, it tells Claude to proceed with the planned implementation. Second, it gives boundaries. Keep it minimal, readable, and consistent with the existing structure. So now let's move into the execution of the feature. At this point, Claude will update the logic so that each task can be marked as completed or incomplete. So when a task is clicked, toggle completed state before true and false. So let's go ahead and test this interface. Enter a task such as write an article on AI multi-agent system. Here, the implementation will typically include logic similar to if a task is completed, show strike-through style, and if a task is not completed, show a normal display, which has been shown in the implementation over here. So the first condition explains what should be happening when a task is completed, and the text should appear crossed out. The second condition explains that incomplete tasks should be looking normal. So now let's go ahead and validate the final system. Run a final validation of the entire task validation system. We have task creation, task deletion, completed state toggle, confirm everything is working correctly. So this particular prompt checks for 4 things: whether the UI behaves properly, whether the tasks can be created, whether the tasks can be deleted, and whether the completed state toggle works. So this is the final demo moment where the Claude behaves like a full team that has built, reviewed, tested, and validated the system. Instead of stopping after the code generation, we're making sure that the final output actually works as expected. So this was a very simple task manager app workflow where we use the concept of multi-agent system development. So if you want, you can also summarize the entire workflow in simple terms as if you're explaining it to a beginner developer. So this is for your own reference. So to summarize, in this demo, we did not use one huge prompt and hope for the best. We used Claude like a structured team. The UI builder created the first version, the reviewer checked the quality, the documentation writer explained the workflow, and the tester looked for possible issues. Then Claude applied only the necessary improvements, and finally, we added a new feature using the same structured approach. So the main takeaway is simple. Multiple agents are useful because they help us divide the work. And when the work is divided properly, the output becomes easier to understand, easier to review, and easier to improve. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. We explored how multiple agents can be used to break down complex tasks into simple roles and improve the quality of output step by step. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to Simplilearn for more such insights and check out our related videos.